The golden sun rose over the small fishing village of San Isidro, its rays spilling gently across the water like melted honey. The air smelled of salt and smoke from the morning fires, and the waves whispered against the shore. Somewhere beyond the sound of the sea, the faint crowing of roosters blended with laughter from distant children, barefoot and free. And among the narrow huts built from bamboo and nipa leaves stood a small, worn home, its walls patched with old tarpaulins, its door half-hinged, and its heart still aching from loss. Inside lived a little girl named Mira, 8 years old, her hair black as the feathers of the crows that circled the coconut trees, her eyes wide and bright even through hunger. Mira's world had grown quiet since her mother passed away the year before. Her father worked long days mending nets and hauling fish, and her grandmother, Aling Rosa, did her best to keep food on their small wooden table. The mornings were always the same. The sound of the waves, the smell of rice boiling, and the silence that followed Mira's gaze toward the empty chair where her mother used to sit, humming old Visayan lullabies as she brushed Mira's hair. The channel intro voice gently fades in, calm, inviting, and sincere. Welcome, dear hearts, to another story of hope, love, and miracles found in the smallest moments. Today we journey to a small fishing village in the Philippines, where a young girl's grief becomes a bridge between heaven and earth. Stay with us till the end, for this is not just a story, it's a reminder that love never truly leaves. The music softens. The narration continues. Mira's days were simple. She helped her grandmother wash clothes by the river, fetched water in plastic jugs heavier than her tiny arms could bear, and watched other children run to school, their laughter echoing in the streets. She had stopped going to school since her mother died. Her father said they couldn't afford the uniform anymore, and besides, Mira had to help at home. But she missed her classmates, and even more, she missed the mornings when her mother would braid her hair and tuck a small flower behind her ear, saying, "You are my sunshine, Anak." That word, Anak, meant child, but from her mother's lips it sounded like music. At night, when the crickets sang and the wind carried the smell of the sea, Mira would lie awake, watching the hole in the nipa roof where she could see the stars. She liked to think her mother was one of them, the brightest one, always watching, always near. One morning, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the sea looked restless. Mira walked along the shore collecting small seashells she could sell later in town. The sand was cool under her feet, and she hummed one of her mother's lullabies softly. She bent down to pick up a shell when something white caught her eye, light, almost glowing, drifting gently on the wind. It floated toward her and landed softly in the sand before her toes. A feather, pure white, soft as the clouds that hung over the horizon. Mira picked it up carefully, her small fingers trembling. She had never seen a feather so white, not from the chickens or the pigeons that flew over the marketplace. This one felt different. She looked up at the sky. "Nene," she whispered. The wind answered with a soft sigh that brushed her cheek like a kiss. For reasons she couldn't explain, tears filled her eyes. She clutched the feather against her chest and felt warmth spread through her, as though someone had wrapped invisible arms around her. She ran home, her feet kicking up sand, heart racing. "Lola," she called. Look what I found." Aling Rosa was sitting on the bamboo steps, sorting dried fish into baskets. She looked up, smiling faintly. What's that you got there, Apo?" "It's a feather, but not like any I've seen. It came from the sky." The old woman chuckled softly. "Maybe the wind just carried it here." But Mira shook her head. "No, Lola, I think it's from Nene. She sent it." Rosa's hands paused. For a moment, her eyes softened, but she said nothing. She had lived long enough to know that children find comfort in small miracles. And maybe, just maybe, sometimes those miracles were real. That night, as the rain began to fall, Mira placed the feather under her pillow. She whispered, "Good night, Nene," before closing her eyes. She dreamed of her mother, standing by the shore, wearing a white dress, her hair flowing like the waves, smiling. She reached out her hand, and from her palm another feather drifted toward Mira. When she woke, her cheeks were wet. The feather still rested under her pillow, soft and perfect. Days passed, and Mira began to notice strange, beautiful things. The mango tree outside their hut, which hadn't borne fruit in months, suddenly sprouted small blossoms. The stray dog that always barked at her wagged its tail instead. Even her father, who had grown quiet and tired since the funeral, began to hum again while fixing nets. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mira took the feather to the shoreline. The tide whispered at her ankles, and she closed her eyes, feeling the wind rush through her hair. "Nene," she said softly. "Are you really there?" A single wave rolled up and touched her toes before retreating. And in that moment, she heard it, faint and far, like a melody carried by the sea, her mother's voice humming the same lullaby. Mira's eyes filled again, but this time, she smiled through her tears. When she returned home, her grandmother asked why she looked so happy. Mira only said, "Because Nene came to see me today." That night, the feather glowed faintly under the moonlight, resting on the small altar where her mother's photo stood beside a candle. The voice of the narrator slows, filled with warmth. Sometimes love hides in small things, in feathers that drift from nowhere, in songs carried by the sea, in the eyes of those who still remember. Mira didn't know where the feather came from. She only knew what it meant. A promise that her mother was still watching, still loving, still near. The camera pans out to the village, to the waves breaking softly against the rocks. Life goes on. The sea breathes. The stars glow. And in a small nipa hut by the shore, a little girl sleeps with peace in her heart for the first time in a long while. But the story isn't over. The feather was only the beginning. The days grew brighter in San Isidro, but time never stood still. Weeks turned into months, and Mira grew taller, her eyes still holding the same wonder. She kept her mother's feather inside a small glass jar wrapped in a piece of cloth. Every night, before bed, she'd whisper goodnight to it as though her mother could hear her through the clouds. One morning, a storm rolled in from the east, strong, unkind, and wild. The villagers rushed to pull in their fishing boats, to secure their roofs, to pray that the winds would spare their homes. Mira and her grandmother huddled inside their hut as the waves pounded the shore like angry drums. Then came a terrible crash. Half the roof ripped away. The wind howled through the gaps, scattering their few belongings. Mira screamed as rain poured over them. And in the chaos, she saw her glass jar fall and shatter on the bamboo floor. The white feather lifted, carried by the storm's breath, and vanished through the broken roof. "No," Mira cried, running toward the door. Her grandmother tried to stop her, but Mira dashed into the storm, her small frame swallowed by wind and rain. She ran toward the sea, her feet sinking into mud, her heart pounding. The sky was black, the water furious, but she shouted anyway, through tears, through thunder, "Nene! Don't go! Please don't go again!" Lightning flashed, illuminating the shoreline, and for one fleeting moment, Mira saw a figure in white standing among the waves. Her mother's smile. Gentle, sorrowful, loving, like light in the middle of the storm. "Mira," the voice came, soft as wind. "I never left." And just like that, the storm began to ease. The wind softened. The rain turned to drizzle. The sea calmed, as though lulled by a mother's touch. Mira fell to her knees, sobbing, whispering, "I miss you, Nene." Something brushed her shoulder. When she looked down, there it was, the feather, damp but glowing faintly, lying against the sand. She held it close, her tears mixing with the rain. By the time her father found her, the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light over everything. He scooped her up, trembling. "Mira, Anik, don't ever run like that again," he said, voice cracking. She clung to his neck and whispered, "Nene saved me." He didn't answer, but as he carried her home, he glanced at the feather in her hand and, for the first time in months, believed it too. From that day on, something changed in their home. Her father began to smile again, even laugh. The scent of warm rice and dried fish returned to their mornings. Mira started going back to school, barefoot but proud, carrying her mother's feather tucked in her bag. Whenever she felt lonely, she would touch it and feel calm, like sunlight inside her chest. Years passed. The fishing village grew, and so did Mira. She became known as the girl with the white feather, the one who always believed love could reach across the clouds. She helped her grandmother sell goods at the market, and sometimes she would tell stories to other children. Stories about angels that come down as feathers, about how those we love never really leave us. One afternoon, when she was about 15, a tourist visiting the village heard her story and was moved to tears. He filmed her telling it under the same mango tree where she used to play. That video spread far beyond the island, across cities, across oceans, touching hearts that had forgotten how to hope. People began writing letters, saying, "Your story reminded me of my mother," or, "I found a feather too after my father died." Mira didn't understand how far her words had traveled, but she smiled every time she read those messages. She would look up at the sky and whisper, "See, Nene. You're helping so many people." And sometimes, when the sunset painted the sea in gold, a white feather would drift past her, landing on her shoulder. She would close her eyes and whisper, "Thank you." When Mira grew into a woman, she left San Isidro to study in the city. Her father had grown old, her grandmother frail, but both watched her with pride as she boarded the bus with the same feather still kept safe in her small pouch. In the city, she worked hard, studied harder, and every challenge reminded her of her mother's voice, "You are my sunshine, Anik." Whenever life felt heavy, she'd take out the feather, hold it to her heart, and remember why she was strong. Years later, when she returned to San Isidro as a teacher, the children ran to her like waves returning to the shore. She built a small classroom by the beach, teaching them to read, to write, and to believe that miracles could live in the smallest things. One evening, after class, she walked along the water's edge. The sea glimmered under the twilight, and the same gentle wind that once carried her mother's feather brushed her cheek. She smiled, looking up at the sky. "Nene," she whispered, "I did it. I made it through." A single feather drifted down from the sky, landing softly in her palm. She laughed softly, tears in her eyes, and whispered, I know you never left." The camera pans out, the music swells, warm, nostalgic, and full of peace. The narrator's voice returns, calm and soothing. Sometimes love doesn't speak in words. It speaks in feathers, in sunlight, in the scent of the sea, in the quiet belief that those we've lost are only a whisper away. And somewhere above the clouds, a mother watches her daughter smile, proud of the little girl who once chased a feather through the storm, and found her strength within it. Because love, when it's true, never fades. It only changes form, from hands that hold to winds that guide, from lullabies to the rustle of wings. And if you ever find a feather lying quietly where you least expect it, maybe, just maybe, it's a message from someone you love, telling you they're still with you, and always will be. The music fades out softly, replaced by the calm hush of the sea.